Do you like animals? Do you fantasize about being able to turn into an animal in a D&D game and wreak havoc on the battlefield? Not with tooth and claw necessarily, but by calling down the radiant power of the moon? Do you want to be a boomkin? Well, if so, you are going to love the build I've put together this week. Welcome to D4. Hey everybody, so here at D4, every week I take a deep dive into character builds for my favorite role-playing games. I like to crunch numbers about them, I like to theorycraft about them, not so that I can tell you the right or the best way to play a character, but to explore one potential way of building something that's hopefully both fun and powerful to play. So if you also enjoy creating characters for your favorite role-playing games, or if you're just into theory crafting, or if you're looking for tips or ideas on how to build something that you're thinking about playing, then welcome home. This is where you belong, and I'm so glad you're here, so thanks for watching. My name's Colby. So yeah, I've been thinking a lot about the Moonbeam spell lately. You may have noticed if you've been watching my recent videos. I mean, under 2014 rules, it was always a decent spell. It's not a huge area of effect, but the damage from it scales really nicely, better, I think, than just about any other persistent damage, like every round in an area spell, right? For raw numbers, at least. Radiant damage is rarely resisted, and at least you could move it with an action if need be. But in 5.5, even though the spell itself got almost no changes, I think it's better than ever. For one reason. As I've discussed a lot, most spells that do persistent area damage, like Moonbeam, Cloud of Daggers, Spirit Guardians, and more, used to do damage when one of two things happened. Either they moved into the spell's area, whether voluntarily or not, or they started their turn there. This made doubling up on damage with these kinds of spells fairly easy if you could push an enemy into the area on your turn, because then they'd almost inevitably start their own turn in the area too, right? And take damage both times. We built around this tactic a lot back in the day. But in 5.5, most of these kinds of spells had their wording changed so that they now deal damage when one of three things happen. When they move into the area, whether voluntarily or not, still the same. When they end their turn in the area, much tougher to ensure, or most potently now, arguably, when the area of effect of the spell moves over the space of the enemy, right? This makes a lot more sense logically, I think, but more importantly, it really changes what you can do with a spell that you can move. Spirit Guardians and spells like it that just cover an area around you probably got the biggest benefit from this, right? Which we've built around with things like the Cleric of Chaos, for example. But Moonbeam gets a nice bump from this wording change too, and I have yet to try and build around it to take advantage. Because while yes, having to use your action to move Moonbeam is a bummer, no doubt, but regardless, it's still a pretty nice way to do damage to multiple enemies every round with just a single spell. You can move Moonbeam a whopping 60 feet on your turn with your action. And if it does damage to every enemy as long as you move the beam over them, that's a pretty cool and fun and kind of funny way to, like, I don't know, pretend you're a giant magnifying glass just strategically moving around the battlefield, frying your enemies with radiant moonlight, right? And so yeah, the idea of trying to build around this concept led me to something that I haven't done on this channel ever, I don't think. And that is to make a Moon Druid blaster. Reminiscent, yeah, perhaps of a Moonkin from WoW, for those of you that are familiar with that old trope. A character who transforms into a beast not so that they can do lots of damage with like their claws and their teeth, but so that they can primarily hold enemies in the radiant fire of that powerful Moonbeam spell and move it around the battlefield to do damage to as many enemies as possible on their turn. All while simultaneously remaining a durable target that's capable of some fantastic utility and support. Sounds like a lot of fun to me. Want to see what it looks like? All right, I proudly present D&D Build number 245, the Moonkin, the Lunar Burst, Bad Moon Rising, Dark Side of the Boom, the Moonraker, Druish Space Laser, Barrier of Effect, Hold Moonstir, the Crater Maker, the Lunamancer. So many good ones this week. Thanks as always to D-Force for bringing it with the suggestions. I think I'm gonna have to go with the suggestion from Three Otters in a Trench Coat, the Moonkin. It's fairly descriptive and still gives a nice little callback to that Moonkin. Hopefully enough of you are familiar with World of Warcraft that it tickles your brain a bit. Huge thanks to my good friend Randall Hampton for the fantastic artwork that he put together for the build this week. He does this every week. He's so talented. If you'd be interested in following him to check out the other stuff that he's created, or to potentially even, reach out to him to create some art for your character or maybe your entire party, I will put links in the video description as always on how to do so. And we don't have a sponsor for the video this week, but I did wear one of my t-shirts that's available for sale if you'd be interested. This is the Proud Member of the Silvery Barbs t-shirt. I've actually had people comment on this and be like, I hate that spell. Why would I want to buy that shirt? And it's like, no, that's the point. That's the joke, right? Like the Silvery Barbs mob is the mob that is always attacking me off camera like this whenever I mention the spell because they're so angry at the spell. So if you too are really cute or don't like the spell, then this is a great option for you to potentially purchase. Check in the video description to see links to my merch shops. I'd appreciate it if you saw something on there that you liked, whether a t-shirt or a bar of soap with dice embedded in it, or a candle that says welcome home on it and has my logo and it smells really yummy. I think I'm gonna light it right now actually. Then yeah, I'd appreciate it if you'd pick something up if you think it's something you'd enjoy. Okay, jumping into the build. At level 1 for our starting class, we're just going to start Druid because there are too many things we want to get to early on with this build from Druid, and I don't want to delay it, not even for Constitution saving throw proficiency, if you can believe it. Though, I wouldn't say no to a level 1 fighter dip. Actually, Sorcerer would probably be the better route on this build, or maybe Artificer. But anyways. As for our species, for the build today, I'm going to say let's go human. Even though, really just about anything would work, keep in mind that Wild Shape no longer says that we retain our species traits. It used to say that we'd retain traits from our race, right? But in 5.5, no, it's just class features, languages, and feats. So any cool species features that we might get, like say the Dragonborn's breath weapon, an ASMR transformation, something that a Goliath gets to do when it hits you, wouldn't technically work, right? Once we were wild shaped, barring an exception from your DM, of course, and I'm sure plenty would allow it. But since I'm planning on being wild shaped basically all of the time on this build, I think I'd go for human here since they get an extra origin feat primarily, and we are told that we get to keep all of our feats, right, when wild shaped. And so help me if I get comments about how that extra origin feat would go away once we're wild shaped because it comes from us being a human species and that's a species trait and so we don't get it. I'm just gonna smile and nod. And thank you for your engagement in the comments. Anyways, getting an extra skill proficiency and daily free heroic inspiration from human are pretty sweet too, but yeah, if you'd really rather take something else, go for it. As for our background, I'm going to say, as always, take an old one and customize it or make a custom background if you can. But if not, Farmer is going to work fine since it gives us one of the origin feats that I'd really want to have here and the ability score increases that we want. As for those origin feats, yeah, I think I would take Tough and then probably Lucky. Tough is nice in that it gives us 2 extra hit points per level, and I want to be as durable as I possibly can be on this build, especially since Wild Shape doesn't give us the hit points of the beast that we turn into anymore, right? It just gives us temporary hit points, but then we can stay Wild Shaped for longer, really, because we don't drop out of the form when the new hit points that we got go away, right? So yeah, Tough feels pretty important here, but as for that second one, yeah, I really like Lucky for the free advantage that we get, proficiency bonus times per day, but you can take something different if you'd really like. Alert, Musician, something else, it would be fine, I think. We're not going to be doing a lot of attacking on this build, so it doesn't necessarily help our numbers a ton, but it's still great to have, when we need it, for saving throws especially, perhaps. As for our ability scores, I'm assuming that we go the point buy method as always and say let's take a 15 wisdom and a +2 there, a 15 constitution and a +1 there, and then probably a 15 dexterity as well. It'll help out our armor class and our initiative, among other things, when we are not wild shaped. As for our starting equipment, let's start off with some scale mail and a shield, and then just whatever basic necessities you may have. Most of the time on this character, we're ideally not going to need that armor and shield, especially not in a few levels when we do some multi-classing, but they will be nice to have at these early levels, especially when we're caught out of beast form, right? As a Druid 1, then, we get Druidic, that special language that Druids learn that they can use to leave messages for one another with twigs and leaves. And then we get a Primal Order. And, I'm assuming that we go Warden here to get medium armor proficiency. We're not going to need that for very long, as I've kind of hinted at. So really, this is just to help us out at early levels. If you'd rather go Magician instead for another Druid cantrip and a Wisdom bonus to your Nature or Arcana checks, go that route instead. And then we get Druid spells here too, and you're basically going to want to go with the usual suspects here, I think. Guidance for a free D4 to ability checks, a damaging cantrip for now, like Poison Spray, or sure, Shillelagh if you want to grab a club to, get us through this first level at least. And then Absorb Elements is nice to have, resistance to elemental damage with a reaction, Healing Word and Goodberry for heals and utility, Entangle and or Fairy Fire for our concentration to debuff or snare enemies, and like Jump and or Long Strider to improve our movement. All of them are good options. You know who else is incredibly good? My channel members and patrons. I wanted to give a quick shout out to you guys. Thank you so much for your support. You make this channel possible, and I'm so grateful to you. If you're not a member or a patron, I'd love it if you'd consider becoming one. There's a button down there that says join. You click on it or look at the Patreon link in my video description, and you'll see, what perks I offer to my channel members. And just know that I give all of my perks to anyone who signs up at just the silver level or higher, and I just ask that you pay what you think it's worth and what you think you can afford. But those perks include access to the library of write-ups that I do for all of my builds to help you recreate it a little more easily yourself, access to the community Discord server, and access to the live monthly Q&A hangout sessions that we do. If you can't or don't want to support the channel in this way, that's okay. I'm grateful that you're here watching, liking, subscribing. Those are also nice ways to support, so thanks. At level 2, Druids get Wild Shape, and I often kind of gloss over the rules on Wild Shape these days, but since this is going to be our main deal, we better make sure we're clear on how it works today, especially since, there have been some significant changes since the 2014 rules. So from now on, we can use a bonus action twice per day, recovering 1 use on a short rest, to transform into a beast of 1/4 challenge rating or lower that doesn't have a fly speed. These limitations will change soon. We gain temporary hit points when we Wild Shape, equal not to the beast's hit points or anything, but it's just equal to our Druid level, regardless of what we transform into. Wild Shape ends after a number of hours equal to half our Druid level, or when we use Wild Shape again, or when we become incapacitated, yikes, but not when we lose the temporary hit points that we gained when we Wild Shaped or anything. So potentially that means we can stay Wild Shaped longer than before, though it's not as big a buffer to our overall health, right? We can know up to 4 Wild Shape forms at any one time. That'll increase as we go. And we can swap one form out for something else when we finish a long rest. We don't have to have seen the beast before here. That's polymorph, right? And while we're Wild Shaped, our statistics are replaced by the beasts, though we do retain a lot of our own stuff. Our creature type, so we can still be affected by things that affect humanoids, right? Our hit points, our hit dice, our mental ability score, so intelligence, wisdom, charisma, our languages, we can speak now in beast form, that's nice, and then any class features and feats. Again, no species features listed here, though your DM may allow them. You retain your skill and save proficiencies and use your own proficiency bonus for those things, but you also gain any skill and save proficiencies the beast might have, and basically you get to choose to use the one that's higher if you and the beast both have a proficiency, right? You can't cast spells while you're Wild Shaped, though we will get a limited number of spells that we can cast next level, and you can concentrate on spells that you've already cast before you Wild Shaped. Alright, as for which beast forms to take at this level, I'd go with the giant venomous snake, the giant wolf spider, the giant centipede, and the giant frog, personally. Though I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about why, because next level we're going to get to make different choices. Now, We also get the Wild Companion feature at Druid 2, which lets us summon a familiar, like via the Find Familiar spell, by burning either a wild shape use or a spell slot. That's nice. And that familiar lasts until the end of a long rest. I'd plan on having a familiar with us to scout, to potentially take the help action and things, right? Just to maybe sometimes be next to us in case we want to trigger pack tactics if one of our wild shape forms has that feature, right? Later on, we might even do something kind of crazy with them. But anyways, familiars are always useful. At level 3, we get our subclass, and yes, we're going with the Circle of the Moon, as I've said, and Moon Druids get some pretty awesome buffs to their wild shape right here in the form of the Circle Forms feature. This says that now we can transform into beasts equal to our Druid level divided by 3. So that's a CR1 for now, a CR2 at Druid level 6, etc. Also, the temporary hit points that we gain when we are wild-shaped jumps up to 3 times our Druid level. That's nice. And that our armor class equals 13 plus our wisdom modifier if that total is higher than the beast's armor class, and hint hint, it almost always will be. As for which beasts to take here, I need to be careful not to spend too much time talking about each of these or we're going to be here all day, so let me just say that for now I'd personally go with the giant toad, the giant octopus, the giant spider, and then one of either the lion, the brown bear, or the ape. I'll talk about why I'm suggesting these forms next level. For now, let's just mention that we get second level druid spells here. Moon Druids get Cure Wounds, Starry Wisp, and above all, Moonbeam for free. All good spells, and Moonbeam in particular we've already discussed, but yeah, a solid 2d10 radiant damage, cast as an action, requires concentration, and anytime the spell's area, it's only a 5-foot radius, so not really big, but anytime that area moves over a creature, or they move into the spell's area themselves, or they end their turn in the spell's area, they will make a constitution save and take half damage on a save, no more than once on a turn, but potentially, yeah, multiple times per round. And yeah, we can move it up to 60 feet with our action. The best part about these Circle of the Moon spells, though, we can cast them when we are wild-shaped. That's a huge upgrade from 2014 rules, and I love it. Beyond those spells, again, I'd look to grab the usual suspects. Aid to help keep you and your companions alive longer, Lesser Restoration for a nice cure-all, Hold Person for a fantastic single-target paralysis, on humanoids at least. Pass Without Trace is amazing utility when your party is trying to be stealthy, and sure, Spike Growth can be great depending on your team and your build, though I'm not planning on building around it today. Okay, at level 4, I think it's time to do a little multi-classing. It doesn't necessarily need to happen at this level, but now that we've got our better wild shape options and Moonbeam, I think it's a good time to take a little dip. And I want just a single little level in Monk, making us a Monk 1. Why Monk, you may ask? There are a few potential benefits, but we're really just here for one main reason, and it's that at level 1, monks get the martial arts feature, which says that as long as we are unarmored and unshielded, so we're going to need to make sure we doff those things if we were using them before, but that's not a huge problem since we'll hopefully be wild-shaped all the time in combat, right? But yeah, in that case, we can make an unarmed strike with our bonus action just whenever we want. We can also use our dexterity for the hit and damage there if we want, but we generally won't. Usually the beast's strength score is their best. And we can do a d6 of damage instead of the usual 1 damage for our unarmed strike, 1 plus our modifier, right? Why is this such a big deal for this build? Well, it's quite simple. In 5.5, remember, when we try to grapple now, we simply make an unarmed strike, and I very much want to grapple while we are in our beast form today. But I'd much prefer to not have to give up my action to do so if possible, because I want to use that action to move Moonbeam. And yeah, since when wild-shaped we retain our class features, there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to now make an unarmed strike / grapple as a bonus action, right? Even when wild-shaped. Some of you may be asking, can we grapple when wild-shaped? The rules state that we need a free hand to do so. Do our beasts have hands? Well, I mean, I thought a lot of you might be asking that question when I put out a poll on this a couple of weeks ago, but it turns out that, yeah, maybe only like 4% of you think that a beast shouldn't be able to grapple. At least a bear in this particular case of the poll, right? So yeah, That is a nice segue into why we chose the beast forms that we chose last level. Since grapple checks now call for either a strength or dexterity saving throw from our target against our grapple DC when we first try to initiate the grapple, and that's going to be 8 plus our proficiency bonus plus our strength modifier, or since we're a monk, could be our dex modifier, but again, beasts generally have a better strength, then we're going to want to pick the creature that has the highest strength score that can reasonably be expected to grapple. That would mean, yeah, the brown bear with its 17 strength, or the lion, which has the same strength score. I think the lion is the better pick if we're planning on occasionally making attacks with our action too. Maybe we don't need to move Moonbeam for whatever reason. But I'm not quite as sure if everyone would be on board with a lion grappling as much as they were a bear grappling, right? I mean, I don't know. I've seen some lion hugs that look pretty terrifying. And I'm pretty sure that plenty of DMs would allow a lion to grapple with their maw, right? But anyways, if for some reason your DM is just like, nope, no hands, no grapple, then just pick the ape. They're only a 1/2 CR beast, but they have the same strength modifier, and that's what we care about the most. And they absolutely have hands, so lay off even the strictest DM in the world. As for the other options that I mentioned, the giant toad and the giant octopus both automatically grapple when they hit, but technically that requires them to actually use their action, right? Have a specific action that says, hey, when you hit with this action, then you automatically grapple. So, I mean, I can see some DMs being like, yeah, sure, your unarmed strike can be a tentacle attack and it will auto grapple too, but rules as written, it doesn't work. An unarmed strike is not the same thing as using the giant toad's specific bite action, right? But it's really cool if you want to play with it. And swallowing a target as a giant toad is even cooler. Oh, and the giant spider that I mentioned is just neat because they can spray webs, sometimes to potentially restrain enemies, as well as climb on ceilings and stuff. Okay, you with me so far? Great. Don't forget that monks also get unarmored defense here, but generally that's not going to be as good an AC as 13 plus our wisdom modifier, and alas, we can't stack the druid's bonus to armor class with unarmored defense, right? So yeah, I mean, it'll help us out if we get knocked out of wild shape in the middle of a fight or something, but otherwise it's not going to do much for us. At level 5, we're going back to druid though. We dabbled in the monkish life. Maybe we had some extended downtime resting in a monastery, recovering from some grievous wounds, or adding some discipline and focus to our nature and balance aesthetic. But back to the woods we go here, making us a druid 4, and that means we get our first general feat. And my initial plan here was to take the grappler feat, naturally, if we really want to be good at grappling, right? Because the grappler feat, among other things, lets us do damage and attempt to grapple once per turn when we use our unarmed strike. So, it's like free damage if we're trying to grapple, yeah. But then I read the fine print. Quote, when you hit a creature with an unarmed strike, you can both damage and grapple as part of the attack action? What the crap? Seriously, why in the world is this limited to the attack action only? What possible abuse could come from just allowing this to work once per turn, regardless of whether you're using your bonus action or your action to grapple? Seriously, wizards, I feel targeted. Anyways, yeah, we might pick this up later, this feat. It has some other little benefits, but it's more important for us now instead, I think, to get our wisdom score up. Grappler only raises your strength or dexterity, right? So let's grab, you knew this was coming, right? Spellfire Adept. New favorite, I don't care about my survivability feat. Hey, I mean, we're a druid. We're healing to full on a short rest anyways. Well, next level at least, once we pick up the right spell for it. Yeah, we're not burning through a ton of spell slots on this build, so I'm not super worried about, whether we can, recover our hit points with our hit dice on a short rest. And Spellfire Adept is awesome. It's going to bump our wisdom to 18, and then it says that once per turn, when a spell we cast deals radiant damage, we can spend up to 2 of our hit dice and add that damage to the total. Woohoo. Oh, and it says that we ignore resistance to radiant damage. That doesn't come up a lot, but it's nice if we need it. So yeah, now we can add a little damage to our moonbeam if we don't mind burning our hit dice for it. And if you, for whatever reason, don't want to take this feat, you really value those hit dice of yours, sure, grab Warcaster. It'll be great for concentration, and it'll bump our wisdom to 18 as well. Okay, At level 6, we would be a Druid 5, and that means first up we get Wild Resurgence, which lets us recover a use of our wild shape by spending a spell slot anytime, that's nice, or lets us spend a use of wild shape to gain a first level spell slot, but only once per day. Yay for versatility. And then we get 3rd level spells. Moon Druids get Conjure Animals for free, and that is a solid spell and not broken anymore. It just summons a large pack of spirit animals that you can move when you move. And just like with Moonbeam, if an enemy enters within 10 feet, or the pack enters within 10 feet, or they end their turn nearby, right, then they make a dexterity saving throw or take 3d10 slashing damage. But there's no half damage on a save here. And that's a huge bummer. Otherwise, it would probably be better for us than Moonbeam, since it would let us move the pack and still keep our action free, right? To maybe make some beast attacks. But half damage on a save does a lot of work. And of course the radiant damage helps us too. Conjure Animals doesn't do radiant damage, so yeah. I wouldn't plan on using the spell much here myself. Other than that, for sure grab Aura of Vitality to heal an average of 70 hit points during a short rest. Daylight and Dispel Magic, and Plant Growth and Revivify and Sleet Storm, and the new Saloon's Viper spell. I'm planning on building around that one day soon. These are all great options worth considering, but nothing that I'm necessarily going to plan on using during combat, so PYF. Pick your favorites. Speaking of combat, it is time for our first damage report. So here's what things would ideally look like for us here. On round 1, assuming we are already in wild shape, it lasts 2 hours at this level. It's not a huge assumption to be making, I don't think. We would cast Moonbeam with our action and then try to hit as many enemies as possible with it, right? Remember that it's only a 5-foot radius cylinder, so 10 feet across, but we could potentially position it to affect a 3x3 area on the grid, right? Though, depending on your table, that might be a circle or it might be a square. Don't fight with me, fight with Pack Tactics. I'll put a link to his video that most recently discussed circles and squares. Also, don't forget that when you are doing damage to multiple enemies with a single spell, like at the same time, right? Like a fireball, for example, we're told to just roll the dice once and apply that damage to all the enemies that you're simultaneously hitting. This is important because on this first round, at least, we'll be doing damage to whatever we hit with Moonbeam, like when we first cast it, simultaneously. And if we burn 2 hit dice to add them to the damage, thanks to Spellfire Adept, we should, rules as written, be adding that 2d8 of extra damage to every enemy that we hit when we first cast it. So just on round 1, right? On subsequent rounds, as we're moving it around, and we're just hitting different enemies like one at a time, we probably can only have the extra Spellfire Adept damage applied to like a single enemy. Unless your DM just has you roll once for the sake of brevity, right? And they know that you're going to be like magnifying glassing the battlefield, and they're just like, just roll the dice one time and I'll just, apply that damage to every enemy that you move it over. In that case, maybe we get even more out of Spellfire Adept. I'm just going to assume that we're applying it to a single enemy from rounds 2 on. Anyways, after we cast Moonbeam, we just run up to one of the enemies that was standing on the edge of the Moonbeam area when we stopped moving it, and with a bonus action, make an unarmed strike, attempt to grapple them so that on their turn they wouldn't be able to move and would thus take damage from Moonbeam again at the end of their turn, right? On subsequent rounds then, rounds 2 through 4, I'm simply going to assume that we are moving Moonbeam around the battlefield to hit as many enemies as possible with our action, blowing hit dice for extra spellfire damage against our priority target, as long as we've got him to burn, stopping the spell's area over our grapple target, and basically just maintaining that grapple, making an unarmed strike a bonus action attack if the enemy hasn't broken our grapple, or, using a bonus action to try and re-grapple our target or grapple somebody else if our initial one died. So do I just assume that the enemy is grappled? I'll say there's a 50% chance that they're grappled, and so would take the extra Moonbeam damage. And then 50% of the time, we're going to be maintaining the grapple and are thus able to make a little bonus action unarmed strike. These aren't perfect assumptions, but it's close enough to what combat would look like, I think, that any numbers discrepancy shouldn't be too big. Here, however, is another big issue to consider that you're absolutely going to want to discuss with your DM before you even bring this build to the table. If you've got an enemy grappled and you're holding them in Moonbeam, does the Moonbeam hurt you too? I don't know why you couldn't position them so that they're touching the beam but you're not. technically, you and your grappled target occupy your own separate spaces, right? You don't share a space on the battlefield. You're playing in a grid. If you're playing in a grid, right, you're still standing next to each other. And you can move Moonbeam to be exactly where you want it to be. And you can move your grappled target too. But some DMs might say, no. If you've got them grappled and are holding them in Moonbeam, then you're taking damage from it too. And of course, as a wild-shaped druid, that is especially bad for us because if you fail that Constitution save against Moonbeam, you would drop Wild Shape. That's an aspect of the spell we didn't discuss, right? Shapeshifted creatures revert to their true form. So yeah, talk this over with your DM. If it's not going to work, it's not a huge deal. Use Conjure Animals instead. Move it when you move, and then just make your regular Wild Shape attacks with your action. Your average damage will be a teeny bit lower, but not a lot. So, assuming that our enemies are making their save against Moonbeam 50% of the time, averaged over a 4-round combat encounter against 3 enemies, my usual assumption for these multi-target damage builds. Against enemies with a 10 armor class, we would do 58 damage per round on average, and against a 15 AC, it would be 58 DPR. I mean, the only thing going against an enemy's AC here is that teeny little unarmed strike that I assume we're making 50% of the time. And if we have advantage on it, thanks to luck points or maybe a familiar, it makes only a very small difference as the enemy AC goes up, right? Okay, 58 DPR sounds like a lot of damage, but spread out amongst 3 enemies, it's not a ton. One of those enemies is going to be taking a little bit more damage than the other 2 if we've got them grappled and or are making unarmed strikes against them. But, 20 or so damage per enemy isn't incredible. Compared to other multi-target damage builds that I've done to date, that puts them near the bottom of the pack for total damage at this level. But keep in mind, these were builds designed specifically to do as much damage as possible to multiple enemies every round, right? And we're potentially controlling one enemy while dealing this damage, forcing them to waste their action to escape us, hopefully. We're pretty dang beefy with our solid hit points and temporary hit points. We're sitting at, I think, 81 hit points right now, if I've crunched the numbers right. That's not bad for a level 6 druid with a monk dip. And, we've got a decent armor class of 17 at the moment. We can take a beating. Plus, we've got that sweet druid spell list for heals, utility, additional support. This is a really solid build, and I love where we're at. So let's keep going. At level 7, we would be a Druid 6, and that means as a Moon Druid, we get improved circle forms. This says that our beast form attacks can deal radiant damage if we want, and that, even better for us, we can add our wisdom modifier to our constitution saving throws, including, yes, our concentration checks. That is awesome. Makes me a lot less worried about not having Warcaster, though I'd still like it, and really kind of makes me wish I had started like a sorcerer or an artificer or something. That would be like a plus 10 to our constitution saves at this level. Dang, that'd be sweet. The more important thing about Druid 6 is that we can now take on beast forms of challenge rating 2 or lower. I think the Rhinoceros is still the best just like straight up damage dealer if we're just like making attacks with our action. But I think it's a lot harder to argue that a rhino could grapple, right? What are they grappling with? Their teeth, maybe? Like trying to hold somebody down with a hoof? So in that case, the best bonus action grappler that we've got is probably the polar bear now. They have a 20 strength, that's nice, and yeah, bear hugs. The giant constrictor snake and the giant crayfish have auto grapple on hit mechanics still, but just like better than their CR1 counterparts. Again, I don't know that a bonus action unarmed strike necessarily allows that auto grapple to kick in, so I'm probably going polar bear. At level 8, we would be a Druid 7, and that means we get 4th level spells. Moon Druids get Fount of Moonlight for free. Remember, that's the new spell that requires concentration, gives us radiant damage resistance, adds 2d6 of radiant damage to each of our melee attacks, and lets us use a reaction to try and blind someone who damages us. It's a pretty nice spell. I'd like it a lot more if that damage per hit scaled, because yeah, as is, I mean, we're a druid, right? That means we could grab Conjure Minor Elementals here if we really wanted to focus on, increasing damage to our attacks. CME is 2d8 per hit and makes the area within 15 feet of us difficult to rain for our enemies, plus it scales by a d8 per level that we upcast it. That said, as a 4th level spell especially, Fount of Moonlight does radiant damage, meaning it could trigger Spellfire Adept. meaning that at this level, it actually outperforms Conjure Minor Elementals for total damage if we've got hit dice to burn. And that blind with a reaction thing's pretty sweet if the enemy fails their save against it. Plus, it's a Moon Circle spell, so we could cast it while wild-shaped, if need be. So sure, I would probably use the spell if, say, we were in a fight against like a single enemy, and or maybe we didn't think we had much of a chance at grappling a target. You know, go Polar Bear and make 3 attacks if you include your bonus action Unarmed Strike. Adding 2d6 to each of them, that's pretty decent damage, especially when you throw on the Spellfire Adept bonus. Then again, we also get Conjure Woodland Beings here as a spell option, and for multi-target damage at this point, it's worth considering swapping to. It works like Spirit Guardians, but it's only a 10-foot emanation, slightly smaller, but then it does more damage. It's 5d8 damage at this level, which is slightly more than Moonbeam would do if upcast to 4th level. But Conjure Woodland Beings requires a Wisdom save instead of Con for Moonbeam. That's generally better for us. And yes, it deals damage in the same way that Moonbeam does, you know, if they end their turn in the area, when it moves over them, etc. But with the difference that, again, we can just move the area of effect on top of our enemies by just moving around the battlefield, right? Meaning we could use our action to make beast form attacks, or, you know, cast a Moon Circle spell, or maybe try to grapple with our action, etc. And there's also a lot less hand-wringing around, if I grapple an enemy, am I going to touch the spell effect with Conjure Woodland Beings, because, you know, we just decide who takes the damage, right? And it's definitely not going to hurt us. One other nice thing, if the enemy does break our grapple with Conjure Woodland Beings, well, they're going to have to move away from us still if they don't want to take damage from our spell at the end of their turn. But if they do that, they're going to potentially take an opportunity attack from our beastie selves. At level 9, we would be a Druid 8, and that means we get another feat. And I think that I'm probably taking Grappler here, if I didn't last time. I'm annoyed that I can't bonus action like Unarmed Strike attack and grapple, right? But there are other benefits to this feat, right? Advantage on attacks against enemies that you have grappled, the ability to drag them around without being slowed down. And yeah, the point of this build for me was to do both solid AoE damage and add some control. So I'm sticking with the tactic. Grappler would bump our dexterity to 16, which will be nice when we're in human form. Alternatively, you could just cap Wisdom here, or take Warcaster if you haven't yet, bumping it to 19, right? Don't forget, at Druid 8, we can now change into Flying Beasts. I think that my favorite of the options available to us here would be the Giant Dragonfly. It has the best grappling check of all of the Flying Beasts at this level anyways, though that's because of their impressive 18 dexterity. Good thing we have a monk dip. So yeah, if you're thinking now that you want to like grab someone, fly up and drop them maybe, that might be your best option. The Quetzalcoatlus is awesome too, though. Not so much for grappling, but they're huge. Might let you throw your whole party on your back and fly around. They pack a pretty solid punch if you're making attacks with them. And they have flyby. So if you're just wanting to like buzz the field with Conjure Woodland Beings maybe and not worry about getting too close to enemies and taking opportunity attacks, it's probably your go-to. But at level 9, it is time for our next damage report. And we need to decide if we're just going all out for damage or if we're sticking with the grapple and magnifying glass Moonbeam tactic. If you wanted to just go all out for damage, transforming into a rhinoceros here with Conjure Woodland Beings is going to be your best bet. You'd cast the spell first, then Wild Shape, since it's not a Moon Circle spell, right? And then you just run around the battlefield, hitting enemies with Conjure Woodland Beings, and then on subsequent rounds, you'd do the same, but also make your gore attacks as a rhino. But yeah, especially when you add in Spellfire Adept damage from Moonbeam, the damage between Moonbeam and Conjure Woodland Beings is very, very close. And in fact, the Polar Bear plus Moonbeam tactic wins out against very high enemy ACs. And if your DM says that you just roll for Moonbeam damage once for the entire round, regardless of how many enemies are going to get hit by it as you move it around the battlefield, right? Meaning that you would apply that extra Spellfire damage to every enemy that gets hit every round, then Moonbeam wins out, no question. I'm just going to assume that between our luck points and the advantage that we have now against grappled enemies, I think I'm just going to stick with that. And so, under the same assumptions as last time, against enemies with a 10 armor class here, we would do 81 damage per round on average against 3 total enemies, right? And then against a 16 AC, it would be 79 DPR. And that's a solid increase since last check, a good 40% or so. but compared to other multi-target damage dealers that I've done to date, it's still near the bottom of the pack, but still bringing the survivability, the potential control, and all that fun utility and support capability on top of all that damage. Oh, and just in case you're wondering, if you were to go Fountain of Moonlight and make like 3 attacks per round in bear form, we'd be doing about 50 to 60 DPR to a single enemy, and while that's not topping the charts or anything for single target damage, it is very solid. Tier 2 territory compared to other single target damage dealers. And maybe above all, beating out that first Moon Druid build that I did a while back that was focused on single target damage. So yeah, I love having really strong single target and multi-target damage options here, along with a smattering of control. So let's see where we go from here. At level 10, we would be a Druid 9, and this gives us 5th level spells, and Moon Druids get Mass Cure Wounds for free, which is really nice since it'll let you cast it in wild shape form, right? Meaning we've got a solid single target heal in Cure Wounds and a solid group heal in Mass Cure Wounds now that we can cast while staying beastly. But beyond that, for spells, I'm just going to say PYF, Greater Restoration, Maelstrom, Cone of Cold, Tree Stride, Wall of Stone. These are all pretty great spells. Though I'd probably lean towards support or utility stuff that would have their greatest use outside of combat personally, since I'd hope not to be like non-wild shaped during combat whenever possible. But then also at Druid 9, we now get to transform into challenge rating 3 beasts or lower. My favorite here is probably the Spotted Lion for this build with their superior hit and grapple chance thanks to their impressive 23 strength. The other ones to consider here would be the Amphisbaena, with its multi-attack and potential constrict, grapple, and restrain move. Or perhaps, best of all, the Giant Scorpion here, since they get to make 3 attacks with just their action, and 2 of them, their claw attacks, can auto-grapple as well. That would be 4 attacks if you threw in a bonus action unarmed strike, and suddenly Fount of Moonlight or an upcast Conjure Minor Elementals is looking really tempting, right? But the biggest problem with the Giant Scorpion, and for that matter, just wild shape in general, in my opinion, is that frankly miserable hit chance they have. +5 to hit. At character level 10. That's just, oof. That's horrid. Uh-oh. I can feel a soapbox moment coming on. Brace for impact. All right. Here's my quick and easy fix to help balance out Moon Druids at higher tiers of play in D&D. Let the beast that you transform into use your character's proficiency bonus for everything. The rules for Wild Shape specify that you retain your skill and saving throw proficiencies and use your proficiency bonus for them, but that's it. It does say that we gain the proficiencies of the creature and that if specifically a skill or saving throw modifier of the beast's stat block is higher than yours, you can use it, and that's great for skills and saving throws. But when it comes to your hit chance, at level 10, like we are with this build, 9 levels of Moon Druid, right? Our proficiency bonus is a 4. The Giant Scorpion that we probably most would want to change into here, it's a 2. That means that thanks to the Giant Scorpion's fairly mediocre 16 strength, we only have a +5 to hit. Now, I know that if we do hit, we can do some cool things as a Giant Scorpion, like auto-grapple and do some decent sting attack damage, but at this level, a +5 to hit has a pretty low hit chance against most of the monsters that we'll be fighting. On average, their AC is probably going to be a 17 or an 18, meaning we have less than a 50% chance to hit. And that just feels really bad. So bad that against harder to hit enemies, you'd be better off just sticking with a CR2 beast for wild shape here, like the rhinoceros or the polar bear. And yeah, that just feels like bad design. Now, sure, you might be able to get magic items to boost your hit chance, and maybe you can get advantage on at least one of the attacks, but even then, you're lagging way behind most other characters at this level. Even spellcasters that are just slinging cantrips, right? But if we could use our character's proficiency bonus instead of the monster's, it would raise that +5 to hit to a +7. And I know that's still not amazing, but a 10% bump to our hit chance feels so much better. And I don't think it would be overpowered at all. Alternatively, just give your Moon Druids a belt of giant strength and call it good. Okay, that's my rant of the week. Let's move on so that we can get to those CR4 beasts as soon as possible. At level 11, we'd be a Druid 10, and that means as a Moon Druid, we get Moonlight Step, and this is super fun and really cool. It says that wisdom modifier times per day or by spending a second level spell slot or higher. As a bonus action, we can teleport up to 30 feet and have advantage on our next attack before the end of the turn. It's a nice little misty step with a bonus rider that isn't actually considered casting a spell, so we could stay wild-shaped and still cast a moon circle spell that turn if we wanted even. It's nice. At level 12, we would be a Druid 11, and that means we get 6th level spells, and I think the obvious picks are either heal for a massive 70 points of healing in one go. It's great in a pinch, though it's not a moon circle spell, right? So you'd have to pop out of beast form to use it, which makes it really only something to use in case of emergency. The other option is Hero's Feast, of course, for a fantastic party-wide buff if you've got the time to prep for a big, tough adventuring day. PYF here. At level 13, we would be a Druid 12, and that means we get another feat. And assuming that we went Grappler last time, I'm probably just capping Wisdom here, taking it to 20. It's great for our armor class, for our saves, for our skills, for our heals when we need them, right? It's just important for almost everything we do. If you didn't take Warcaster yet, though, it'd be worth considering. I hate delaying capping our Wisdom, but concentration's important. And even though our concentration is pretty solid, having advantage on the checks would be even better. Consider Resilient Constitution here as well. For that matter, I think it's numerically about as good or better for our concentration checks at this point, our proficiency bonus being what it is. And seeing as how it benefits all of our Constitution saving throws as well, not just concentration checks, right? Anyways, you choose. We also get CR4 beasts here at this level. Hooray. And I mean, the giant subterranean lizard, first up, so cool. +7 to hit, isn't great, but auto grapples on a hit and restrains with no size restriction on the grapple, by the way. The lizard's huge. And you can even swallow your grappled enemy if they're medium or smaller, which is just the best. They get a tail attack too, but it has to be against a different target. And that's fine, we're a multi-target damage dealer anyways. And that tail attack can knock enemies prone. The giant coral snake is great as well. If they hit, they can automatically stun their target. The target gets to make a constitution save, and the DC is only a 12, so yeah, not great. But if it works, they actually hallucinate and are affected by madness for 10 minutes. So that's amazing. Only a +5 to hit though here. Ugh. Still with the +2 proficiency bonus. Killing me. And yeah, again, unfortunately, those cool moves aren't usable with a bonus action, but you know what we could grapple with as a bonus action? An elephant's trunk. And I will fight anyone who says otherwise. I mean, yeah, elephants have a whopping 22 strength, and I mean, if the old Loxodon species can grapple with their trunk officially, there's just no way on Earth that an actual elephant couldn't do the same, right? And frankly, I think it's a lot easier to imagine like wrapping your trunk around something and kind of turning the creature and just like sticking their head in the moonbeam area without getting hit yourself here, right? Those trunks are long and maneuverable. What's more, if you wanted to just stick to the rampaging bull in a china shop tactic, like we were doing with the rhino potentially, the elephant is going to be your best bet here too. A +8 to hit for 2d8 +6 damage, and like the rhino, if you charge 20 feet and hit them, you automatically knock them prone, and then can bonus action to trample them for 2d10 +6 more. Unfortunately, that means we wouldn't be getting our bonus action unarmed strike, but the trample hits a lot harder, so good trade. But at level 13, it's time for our next damage report. Since last check, we have added 2d10 more damage to the moonbeam if we upcast it at the 6th level, but that's about it, damage-wise. We will hit a little bit harder with our unarmed strike as an elephant, I suppose, if we get one, and should have an easier time keeping an enemy grappled as well with that superior strength, but otherwise our gains have largely come in the utility support and survivability realms, which is nice too. But averaged against 3 enemies here over a 4-round combat encounter, we would now against a 10 armor class do 110 damage per round, and against a 17 AC it would be 109 DPR. And again, decent little bump since last check, but still near the bottom of the pack compared to other multi-target damage dealers, but still with some nice single target damage options, great support, great utility, great survivability. Altogether, we're a really well-rounded beastie. So let's see what the endgame looks like. At level 14, we would be a Druid 13, and that means we get 7th level spells. And I mean, Reverse Gravity is of course phenomenal group control. You could totally just cast this, Wild Shape, and then run around trampling whichever enemies didn't get lifted up into the air. I also like Firestorm here for some big like multi-target burst area of effect damage if you need it. Regenerate is a nice support option. Whirlwind is a really fun damage and control spell that you can also move with your action, just like Moonbeam, though the damage is less than Moonbeam, especially if we're adding Spellfire Adept, right? But it might be worth keeping this one on hand for some additional potential control while you do damage. It can restrain large or smaller enemies and even move them up towards the top of the 30-foot cylinder that it creates. Plus, I mean, the idea of creating a tornado to suck your enemies up into the sky is just fun and awesome. Especially since if they do become restrained, even if they afterwards make their save to get out, they'll be flung about 100 feet away from the whirlwind in like a random direction. It's so cool. At level 15, we would be a Druid 14. That means as a Moon Druid, we get Lunar Form, which is cool, but I'm not sure if it's that cool for us. First up, it says that when we use our Moonlight Step to teleport, we can bring a willing creature with us as well if that creature is within 10 feet. I mean, that'll always be cool for us, but the other part of this feature, Improved Lunar Radiance, says that once per turn, we can deal an extra 2d10 radiant damage to a target that we hit, quote, with a Wild Shape Forms attack. And I'm not sure that we're necessarily making a Wild Shape Forms attack, right? If we're just using our action to move Moonbeam and otherwise making an unarmed strike to grapple. Even if we're using an unarmed strike to make an unarmed strike, it doesn't show up in like the creature's stat block, right? And so I just don't know that it would be counted as a Wild Shape Forms attack. Rules as written, I say probably no, but let me know in the comments if you disagree. Or maybe if you're a DM, if you'd allow it at your table regardless. Because that would be a nice little bump to our damage potentially. It wouldn't be huge. I just wish that they would have said instead, like, when you're wild-shaped and you make an attack or something. I'm guessing they wanted to get around allowing this to work with spell attacks, maybe? I don't know. Anyways, moving on. At level 16, we would be a Druid 15, and that means we get 8th level spells. I think Animal Shapes is, like, for sure the best option here, since it basically lets you put Wild Shape on your entire party. Now, the beasts that they transform into are capped at CR4, and they have to be large or smaller. But I mean, that could be a giant scorpion, hippopotamus. You know what we could do, even? Cast this on our familiar. The spell lasts 24 hours and doesn't even require concentration. Plus, when the creature gets transformed, they get temporary hit points equal, not to our druid level, but it's like polymorph. It's equal to the hit points of the beast you transform them into. And since the spell says their game statistics are replaced by the beast's statistics, say that 5 times fast, and that their actions are limited by the beast's form's anatomy, I think that would override the familiars can't attack thing. I'm not going to assume we're doing this when I crunch numbers next, but I'm very tempted to. The reality is we'd get just about as much damage from upcasting Moonbeam at the 8th level as we would by putting this on our familiar and then using Moonbeam at the 7th, right? But, I mean, having a pet, not owl, but giant snapping turtle on the battlefield, if it could attack and maybe even grapple enemies, a 17 armor class and 75 hit points on that thing, it's going to survive a couple 3 rounds, I think, and soak up a lot of enemy actions and attacks. It'd be pretty sweet. Keep that spell in your back pocket, I say. Discuss it with your DM. Because yeah, of course, I mean, you could put this spell on more than just your familiar, and I mean, slithering into battle as an entire platoon of giant coral snakes or something would be pretty awesome. And, you know, increase everybody's survivability too. Anyways, we also get access to challenge rating 5 or lower beasts at this level here, and there are plenty to consider. The Triceratops is great in that it's sort of like a better elephant with their multiple attacks and knocking prone and better hit chance, but the problem is, I'm not sure if your DM is going to let you grapple with a Triceratops. Can they hold an enemy in place with like their maw? Maybe? If they've knocked the enemy prone, can they just sort of like put one of their massive feet on the enemy and pin him down? If not, yeah, we'd probably be best off here going the Conjure Woodland Beings route and just rampaging around, making attacks and knocking baddies on their butts. Alternatively, the Hulking Crab is kind of an upgraded giant scorpion with auto-grappling claws. The large subterranean lizard is your upgraded like auto-grapple lizard type with a tail attack, right? So yeah, figure out what's going to be your best grapple option if you want to stick to that tactic. or just switch to the rampaging Triceratops. Staying elephant wouldn't be terrible either. But finally, for us, at level 17, I mean, since I'm not going to get 2 9th level spells on the build, since I took that monk dip, right, I'd at least consider going monk 2 here. That might seem crazy, but hear me out. We'd get Monk's Focus as a feature here, so we could occasionally do Flurry of Blows to increase our chance of landing a grapple or doing more damage, right? Or disengaging, dashing, dodging if we need to, yeah. Uncanny Metabolism to get our focus points back here once per day when we need them, and even Unarmored Movement here to increase our move speed by 10 feet. Especially nice if we're running around with Conjure Woodland Beings going, yeah. And I mean, I don't hate the idea of eventually getting to Monk 4 for a subclass, and then like Druid 16, so we could potentially pick up 2 epic boons, right, at level 19 and 20 if we went that route. Might be worth it if we're playing to level 20. Might not be, since it would mean passing on, the shape change spell, right? You do what you want. I've assumed Monk 2 here, but it's not really going to impact our damage either way. But yeah, especially if you're either going the Conjure Woodland Beings route and running around, or you like to occasionally throw Conjure Minor Elementals on yourself for big single target damage, the extra movement and or an occasional additional unarmed strike via Flurry of Blows would do nice things. But this then brings us to our final damage report. Since last check, we have increased the damage from Moonbeam up to 8d10 per enemy that it touches. Yeah, I'm sticking to that tactic. And I mean, that's some solid scaling, especially with Spellfire Adept added on top, right? And we've got a lot more hit dice to potentially burn through now. I wish it weren't capped at 2d8 per turn. But beyond that, any power increases have really just been in the form of more utility, survivability, support, all those things that druids are really awesome at. I like gaining in both damage and everything else too. Feels pretty nice. But averaged against 3 enemies over a 4-round combat here, against a 10 armor class, we would do 139 damage per round on average, and against an 18 AC, it would be 138 DPR. It's another 30% increase or so, but compared to other multi-target damage dealers I've built so far, it's in the same place as always for total damage, near the bottom of the pack. But also, as always, bringing some control, lots of survivability, as well as support and utility, especially out of combat. So let's get into some final thoughts on this one, shall we? The tier score for the build, if you take the damage they do against every enemy armor class that we calculate for at each of the 4 damage reports, just average it into one big number, we get a 95. So that's decent, but yeah, keeping them kind of in the place they've always been, near the bottom of the pack compared to other multi-target damage dealers. And yeah, I gotta be honest with y'all. This build gave me fits. I haven't taken this long on a script in a really long time. It took me like an entire extra day of work to put it all together because I kept going back and redoing stuff and changing things, recrunching the numbers, rewriting, changing it back. And here's why. At those early levels, it was fine. Magnifying Glass Moonbeam and bonus action Grapple a Target was about as good as you could get damage-wise for persistent AoE damage as a druid. But once you hit those 4th level spells, just going with Conjure Woodland Beings and taking on harder hitting wild shape forms started to take a slight lead damage-wise. And so I kind of just started going down that path. But as I got further down that path, it started to feel like I've basically already done this build with that original, 5.5 Moon Druid, right? And then the Monk Dip and the Spellfire Adept feats kind of felt like a waste. In the end, while yeah, it is really cool, I think, that you can reliably hit a lot more enemies with Moonbeam every round now, the fact that the same wording change that lets you do that with Moonbeam lets you do the same thing with Spirit Guardians, with Conjure Woodland Beings, right, which you can do without spending your action, makes it hard for Moonbeam to keep up damage-wise. If you can get some decent damage in with your action too, right? And yet, I do think the build is just like better overall when you sacrifice that little bit of damage. That one little level of Monk really changes things in a couple of ways. One, it makes control via grappling and AoE damage both possible on the same turn. And two, it actually makes the Moon Druid a lot better at single target damage as well. Just picking up one additional bonus action attack Does really nice things for us when we're adding like Fount of Moonlight or CME damage to every attack, yeah? And yeah, I now have a build on my to-do list that tries to lean into that single target damage even harder. But probably going Spores Druid, I think, instead of Moon Druid. Yeah, no more Moon Druids for me for like a year at least. That's the other thing that added a ton of time and work to the build, figuring out all these different options for all the different beasts and crunching numbers for each of them. Whoosh, exhausting. I think the thing in the end that I'm most nervous about with the build, though, is how many people might not be able to really do the grapple and hold them in Moonbeam thing, whether because their DM won't let their wild shape form grapple, or more commonly, I'd guess, because their DM says that if they're grappling an enemy and holding them in an AoE, they would get hit by the AoE too. For those who fall into that camp, one potential solution would be to take a sorcerer dip so that you can cast Moonbeam with the careful spell Metamagic. And I mean, hey, I toyed with the idea of starting at Sorcerer 1 for Constitution saving throw proficiency, right? Yeah, the build's a little mad, but if we're wild-shaped all the time, we don't necessarily need to have a huge strength or dex. So getting a 13 charisma should be pretty easy. You could do the same thing just by taking the Metamagic Adept feat, if you have access to that feat. Levels in Evocation Wizard would get you there too, since Moonbeam is an evocation spell, right? But remember, the Sculpt Spells feature for Evocation Wizards doesn't come till level 6 now, so that's a pretty hefty investment. All said, sticking with the grapple and hold and Moonbeam concept over a little bit more damage just felt like the right move for the build. And I do love not only the multi-target or single-target versatility you get with it, but also everything else. I mean, we were only burning a single spell slot in a combat encounter, theoretically, right? Just think of how much healing and utility you could provide outside of combat with this build. Or, I mean, sure, thanks to Cure Wounds and Mass Cure Wounds being Moon Circle spells, some, in case of emergency, in-combat healing too. To say nothing of the decent survivability you get as an almost full Moon Druid. Add to all of that the little bit of control you're potentially putting down on a single enemy at a time, and I think the build ends up feeling really versatile and potent. So I hope you enjoyed it, but we are done for the week. So I love you guys. Thank you for all that you do for me, for this channel. It means so much to me, and I'm so grateful. I hope that you'll have a fantastic day and a great week, and if you don't, I hope beyond anything that you will not give up. Please do good and be kind, and I hope I'll see you again soon. But until then, take care. Bye. I see a bad moon rising, I see trouble on the way. I see earthquakes and lightning, do-do-do-do-do. I see bad times today, do-do-do-do-do. Don't go around tonight, well, it's bound to take your life. There's a bad moon on the rise. That is a surprisingly, accurate song for the build today. A bad Moonkin rising. To try and commission him to create some art for you. Though by the beast's statistics. Wow. It's a nice little misty step. It's a nice little Moon Druids get